Hey everyone, Pride Month, it's ending this week. And once again, we must acknowledge it's critical that baseball never just sticks to baseball.
You are Locked On MLB, your daily MLB podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, baseball fans, and welcome to Locked On MLB, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. This is the daily podcast. We talk about all of Major League Baseball. I am your host, Paul Francis Sullivan. Please call me Sully. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. And you can follow us at Locked On MLB Pods on Twitter, or whatever they're calling it these days, and on Instagram. I'm your pal Sully. I'm at Sully Baseball Podcast on Instagram. But the best way to get a hold of me is right here on the YouTube. And leave that hashtag EverydaySully so we can help find your comments and we can talk about them, we can read them. Yeah, I'm out here in front of Oracle Park here in San Francisco, and it is the final weekend of the month, and it's Pride Month. And baseball has taken steps, certainly, in celebrating Pride Month, and there has been some positive celebrations about it, and there has been sense of some inclusion about it along Major League Baseball. Of course, it's not unanimous. It's not unanimous, and not everyone supports Pride Month and what it stands for. And I do want to talk about that. It's important to talk about that because there's a couple points I want to bring up about it. A pair of, I'll say it, two of the most famous and influential current major leaguers took a little bit of a stance against Pride celebrations this year. One of whom was Clayton Kershaw, who did his, I'm hesitant to call it a protest, but certainly made his opinions clear when he had the Pride hat with the rainbow on his Dodgers cap, including the Bible verse on top of it about reclaiming the rainbow and this, that, and the other thing. And while that is not a overtly hostile or angry message there, it is a coded message, as we know that a lot of people who have spoken out against LGBTQ issues and everything like that have done so under the guise of religious beliefs and everything, and wanting to reclaim the rainbow as if only one group could have the rainbow as a symbol is, it's sort of a passive-aggressive protest. Aaron Judge, who I would say is the most influential player in baseball not named Shohei Ohtani, was a little more overt. He didn't want to participate in Pride Day, saying that baseball should be played on the field, and he didn't want to get into things that are woke, and the baseball should stick to the game. Now, I'm not going to get into the word woke, because if you ask 100 people what the word woke means, you're going to get 200 answers. But the notion of baseball should stick to baseball, I am 100% against, and as are you, and as is Aaron Judge, as is everybody. Baseball never sticks to baseball. Just last week, when the Pirates and the Brewers played in front of a packed house, Jacob Misiorowski, the new phenom for the Milwaukee Brewers, announced that he was playing this game in honor of his father and also for Parkinson's awareness, as his father is dealing with Parkinson's disease. That's not sticking to baseball. What about all the times they do a military flyover? Or they have the saluting the troops? What about the standing up to cancer? Or when we have to hold up the little sign saying who we are remembering who died of cancer or this, that, or the other thing? That's not sticking to baseball. Having the pink bat on Mother's Day and the blue bat on Father's Day, or in New York when they wear the NYFD hat on to commemorate 9/11, that's not sticking to baseball. When they wore the 42 uniforms, that's not sticking to baseball. And when they do some of those things like, when they have a kid throwing out the first pitch, and they don't know that the catcher they're throwing to is actually their mother or father who's been deployed to Iraq, and they've been there for like months or years, and they haven't seen their parent for the longest time, and then they take off the catcher's mask and they reveal it's their parent, and the kid starts crying. They run up to him. They do that at so many ball games. And do you know what? That's not sticking to baseball, and it's awesome. I absolutely believe that if you watch one of those things where the kid doesn't realize it's his parent until the last minute and runs up to hug him, and you're not crying at the end of it, then you are a replicant from Blade Runner. In fact, that should be the test they run to see if you're a replicant or not. Is if you can watch that and not cry, you are not human. But here's the deal. Baseball never sticks to baseball. Baseball is always doing things that are outside the game because they know that baseball can be a unifier, and baseball can be a healer, and baseball can, well, I'll be honest, be a tool to make us better people. When David Ortiz said, "This is our bleeping city," in the wake of the marathon bombings, guess what? That wasn't sticking to baseball. But you know what that was? That was showing what baseball can do. It can bring us together. It can heal wounds. Even when the horrible floodings, everything was happening in Houston, and the winning of the World Series was done by the Astros, a lot of that was done in the wake of all the lives that were lost there. And do you know what? It was worth them cheating for them to do it. Sticking to baseball is not something baseball's very good at. Remember when Curt Schilling realized that people were pointing the camera at his foot during the ALCS because of the bloody sock? Well, in his next start in the World Series, he had the letters KALS written on his shoe, which means strikeout ALS, aka Lou Gehrig's disease. That's not sticking to baseball. That's not sticking to baseball at all. Nor was Lou Gehrig when he said he feels like the luckiest man on the face of the earth. This is not what baseball is here for. Baseball is here to be an escape and a respite, to be sure. But it's also there to show things that can make us heal, be unified, and to challenge our prejudices. And baseball is at its best when it stops being about baseball and shows that we can be bigger people and better people. And do you know what? This sense of understanding our own prejudices and understanding our own misconceptions is something that isn't just from the past, the black and white eras of Branch Rickey and of Jackie Robinson. It's things that are still going on, and big things that have happened this century. Summer sports are in full swing. And if you're like me and you're all about baseball, if you like golf, you like tennis, do you know what? There's also some big soccer going on too. FanDuel, it's the best way to get into the game and make every game more exciting. And if you're already following the action, why not make it a little more exciting? With FanDuel, you can get in the game while your friends are getting sunburned at the beach. Now, I use FanDuel for my favorite matchups, and I like to lean on the pitching matchups. I want to see, like, will Sonny Gray get another 10 strikeout day? Or what will Paul Skeens do? Hopefully better than he did in Milwaukee last week. Now, it's easy to use, fast to pay out, and makes regular season games feel like must-watch playoff events. And if I'm using the same game parlay, or I'm watching the bet ride to the ninth inning, FanDuel makes it feel like I'm part of the action. If you're new to FanDuel, new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com to get started. In the early part of the 21st century, this century, the one we're currently about 1/4 of the way through, there was a preconceived notion that Japanese players were not good enough to make it in the major leagues. They weren't scouted, no one was trying to sign them. No matter how good you were, it was looked upon as an inferior league, and anyone from Japan would not be able to make it here. Maybe the occasional pitcher in the Hideo Nomo and a few others were able to make it here in the 90s, and that in itself was a bit of an eye-opener. But could a position player make it? Well, Bobby Valentine and Warren Cromartie, two people who actually went to Japan and played and managed there said, yeah, they can. But few people listened to them. And in 2001, when Ichiro Suzuki signed with the Seattle Mariners, a lot of people poo-pooed it. Thought it was going to be a failure, or thought he was just going to be adequate. He was a star in Japan, and he would probably be a mediocre player here. In a few weeks, he's going to be giving a speech at Cooperstown. Not just based on his wonderful play in Japan, but because he became the MVP of the American League, got 3,000 hits. He was freaking Ichiro. And by the way, I think we've established that a Japanese player can play in the major leagues. How many Shohei Ohtanis did not get to play in the major leagues because of that preconceived notion? Hey, Yankee fans, do you like your last World Series championship? Well, why don't you think that World Series MVP Hideki Matsui? How many of the players like that did not make it in the bigs because of that preconceived notion? Baseball is here to smash our preconceived notions. And some of the players who are honored here at Oracle Park would have been left out of the game if baseball just stuck to baseball. Hell, it's called Willie Mays Plaza. But there's statues to Orlando Cepeda, to Juan Marichal. Over on the other side of the bay, there's one to Willie McCovey. The people who were against their inclusion were the ones saying stick to baseball. And baseball is at its best when it takes our preconceived notions and turns them on their head, to paraphrase the Joker. But also, it's there to be a sign of inclusiveness. Now, I know that's a dirty word for some people, but not to me. We have seen that when fans can see someone who they can relate to, that say, hey, that person's like me, and they're succeeding on the field, that can go a long way to not just growing the sport socially, but also the box office. I'm here in San Francisco right now, and there was a huge Italian population who loved it when the native son named Joe DiMaggio was playing for the New York Yankees and starring. Hell, my grandfather on the Italian side of my family rooted for the Yankees and changed his allegiance to the Mets because of Yogi Berra, a fellow Italian. How many people who are of Jewish descent loved Hank Greenberg in the 30s and 40s and worshipped Sandy Koufax in the 1960s because they saw someone like them succeeding in the major leagues? And when the populations of Cuba and Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic and Mexico started seeing more of their players represented on the big league diamond, how many fans erupted to support someone who looked and sounded like them? To this day, one of the most popular jerseys you're going to see at Dodger Stadium is 34, Fernando Valenzuela, who hasn't pitched for the Dodgers since 1990 and died last year. But he looked like just a Mexican dude. And so many people from the region saw a player succeeding who looked and sounded like them. When I lived in New York City in the 1990s, the Yankees weren't very good, and neither were the Mets in the early 90s. And there was a tremendous amount of Toronto Blue Jays fans in Washington Heights, a predominantly Dominican neighborhood, because the Blue Jays had players like George Bell and Tony Fernandez and a lot of other players from the Dominican Republic. And one of the big reasons that players sign from Japan for such huge contracts is because they know that they're going to get the eyeballs and the advertising money from Japan. People like to see people who look like them, who sound like them, because it creates that illusion that baseball uniquely has of, I could be playing that game. It's tough to watch a basketball game and say, hey, that could be me. No, I'm not 7 feet tall. It's tough to look at a football game and say, hey, there I am. No, I'm not Ben Grimm. Or hockey, I'm not from the Czech Republic or from Montreal. And I like my teeth. But there is an illusion in baseball, and it is indeed an illusion, that a regular person could play it. Greg Maddux was arguably the best pitcher of his generation. He looked like a CPA. Tony Gwynn was arguably the smartest hitter of his generation. He had a big belly. Now, granted, Greg Maddux was indeed a fine athlete, and Tony Gwynn was a good enough athlete that he also played college basketball. But it's part of the illusion that Babe Ruth, a guy who was eating hamburgers and hot dogs and drinking, scotch and smoking a cigar with a big old belly, can wallop not only 714 home runs, but when he pitches, be one of the best pitchers in baseball. Again, it's a bit of a myth because he also was a fine athlete who got a little pudgy by the end, but he was pretty muscular when he started. That was the appeal of Fernando Valenzuela. He didn't look like an athlete. He had a bit of a belly, he had a bit of a chubby face, a bit of a mop hair. He looks like a guy you would just see hanging around. Guy from the neighborhood, throwing complete games in the World Series. And yes, that also goes for people who are not firmly on the heterosexual side of the sexuality spectrum. Sexuality is a spectrum. It's not clean columns that you're in. I consider myself to be heterosexual, but I can see Chris Pine and Idris Elba and say, I get it. I may not be eating from that buffet, but I get it. It's not like everyone is in one lane and they have to stick to that lane. It is a spectrum. And I got news for you. If your reason for not supporting Pride is because you don't want to root for a player who is gay, the news is this: you already have. In the early 2000s, I used to do guest spots on a TV show on ESPN2 called Cold Pizza. I was kind of the resident Red Sox fan, and because Red Sox Yankees were so huge back then, anytime they were going to meet, I got a call saying, Sully, you want to come in and do a guest spot and talk about it? And I would. The reason I'm bringing that up is because in the green room, oftentimes I met some athletes or other people who were also going to be guests on the show. And one of the people who was frequently there was Daryl Dawkins, aka Chocolate Thunder. He was a huge star, both literally and figuratively, for the Philadelphia 76ers, and later became a commentator and was an all-around unbelievably nice person and funny and held court. And I remember one day he was talking about, very casually, about which stars in the NBA in the late 90s, early 2000s who were gay. And I said, really? It caught me by surprise. And he said, oh yeah, it's the worst kept secret in basketball. And he listed several players, several all-star players. And he did so not in a judgmental way, but just in a way like, yeah, we all know. We all know. I'm not going to say who they were, because it's not my business to put people out of the closet. That's their choice. But I thought, really? And he said, oh yeah, it's a whole subculture. And he seemed fine with it. He wasn't saying it in a judgmental way. As I said, he seemed like a very good guy who just was pointing that out. Several years later, I was working on another sports TV show, and one of the people working on it was an NBA beat writer. And I asked him about this, and he said, yeah. And he mentioned two other Hall of Famers, and who, again, it's not my job to push anyone out of the closet, because I don't think it's a bad thing. But he was saying, yeah, track these two careers. These two people who are both in the Basketball Hall of Fame. Their careers mirrored each other. And he said, worst kept secret in basketball. They were in love. And that caught me off guard. And I thought, like, why was that a secret? Well, because they're made to feel like it should be a secret. Do you think it's only the NBA, folks? A Gallup poll showed that 7.5 adults in America identify somewhere somewhere far away from heterosexual on the sexual spectrum. 7.5%. I think that number's pretty low when you consider people probably don't want to answer that or may not be want to admit that. But, let's take that. Let's take 7.5%. In fact, let's take an even lower number. Let's say 5%. 5%. Let's say if approximately 5% of adults identify as something other than heterosexual, then let's look at Major League Baseball. There are 26 players on 30 rosters right now. Let's say 5% were somewhere on the sexual spectrum away from heterosexual. That's roughly 40 players. That's a 40-man roster. And if there are 278 inductees to the Baseball Hall of Fame, statistically, you could be assured that at least a dozen of them would be somewhere on that spectrum. So if you have, in a low estimate, enough players to fill a 40-man roster right now in the major leagues, how many players are out? Zero. And you take a look in history of baseball, how many players have come out? Well, you have Glenn Burke, you have Billy Beane, no, not that one, the other one. You have T.J. House, maybe one or two others. But what they all had in common is they all came out after they retired. They all knew that coming out as players would have been an impossibility. And we do know that some players have come out in the minor leagues. But they know, again, a lot of them came out after they retired. And a lot of them also know the backlash that will happen if they come up and play in the majors. If you don't think there isn't a backlash, why hasn't any come out? And don't say there aren't any. Statistically, 40 major leaguers is a low number. Very low. But I'm giving it to you. Why are 40 still in the closet right now? And if you want to hear, I brought up what Clayton Kershaw said, brought up what Aaron Judge said. Let's hear what a couple other people said. Tyler Townsend was an Orioles minor leaguer in the late 2000s. He said, I was afraid of what would be said by teammates and fans, and there wasn't anybody to look up to who was out playing sports. There's where representation is. There's your representation for you. There was nobody out. Do you want to be the first one through the door? Ty Dunnington, a minor leaguer for the 2010s, quit baseball because of the comments and the culture. It's still part of our language. It's still part of how we talk about things. And when you're in a testosterone-fueled environment amongst professional athletes, it could be used as insults. It could be used to denigrate your masculinity. Our preconceived notions, like Japanese players can't play in the major leagues. The other one I was going to bring up was that Dunnington's quote, which was, during my time in baseball, each comment felt like a knife to my heart. Yeah. Imagine you have to hide who you are. You have to hide who you love. And you're surrounded by not just the culture of who you are being an insult, but also the opposite of who you are being what's praised. No one's trying to take away if you are married. There's always players' wives' activities and kiss cams and everything like that. But why should these players, including the two Basketball Hall of Famers I mentioned, hide who they are? And if you're going to start to quote Bible things at me, this is the wrong podcast to do that. But I'll remind you, you're picking and choosing and cherry picking. Leviticus says you can't have tattoos. And Matthew 25 says that left-handers are cursed. Like Clayton Kershaw. The fact of the matter is this. Pride Month and Pride events are important because the opposite of pride is shame. And clearly enough people are feeling shame to want to hide who they are. Do you honestly think only 3 or 4 major leaguers in history have ever been non-heterosexual on the spectrum? You really think it's that? You really think it's 4? Or is it right now 3 or 4 on every team currently? I think it's closer to that. But the fact of the matter is this. Baseball doesn't stick to baseball. And there's a reason for that. Baseball doesn't stick to baseball because baseball could be used to make us better, to be inclusive. And what I want to see is this. I want to see every good player playing and succeeding. And all of our preconceived notions, whether it's racial, whether it's religious, or whether it's sexual, be thrown away because baseball is a meritocracy. I don't care who you love. Strike the batter out. I don't care who you worship. Get a hit. I don't care what color your skin is. Make the catch. I don't care what your ethnic background is. Make the throw. You can prove your value and destroy all of the stereotypes on the field. When Branch Rickey was asked about the integration of baseball about 10 or 15 years after Jackie made his debut, he said that in a generation, this will be looked upon with incredulity. People will wonder what the big deal was. And the interviewer seemed surprised by that. But he was right. Is there anybody who will look at the roster of any team and scoff at the idea that it's integrated? Scoff at the idea that Jung-Hoon Lee is playing here for the Giants? Anybody here care that someone from the Dominican Republic or Japan or Korea or Canada or Mexico or Puerto Rico or Cuba or Australia is playing on your team? Would anyone think twice if someone was on their team who was Jewish or Catholic or Muslim or Mormon? No, because we're past that. And do you know what? Eventually, we will be past this. And a future generation will look upon this with incredulity. But first and foremost, we have to let those 40 players know that they shouldn't be feeling shame. They should be feeling pride of who they are. And our top players should be the ones leading the way and saying, hey, doesn't matter who you are, just hit the ball. Thank you for making Locked On MLB your first listen today. For your second listen, check out the all-new Locked On MLB Game Night. Every game, every night, all season long. Get local analysis on a national scale. Find MLB Game Night at Locked On MLB on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Talking about Pride Month outside of Oracle Park in San Francisco. This has been Locked On MLB. I am your host, Paul Francis Sullivan. Please call me Sully.